Hi everybody, welcome to this new video, and in this video I want to explain how you can leverage the data analyst in ChatGPT for academic research. And the data analyst is actually a specific tool to do more quantitative analysis with ChatGPT. We all know that ChatGPT is good in generating text, optimizing text, but actually it's also possible to start analyzing quantitative data with ChatGPT, but then we need to use a specific tool called the data analyst. So what I will show in this video is first of all how this data analyst tool works. Then I will give some recommendations on how you can really use it and minimize the risk of hallucination. And then I will show a final use case of a more kind of complex data analytics task that we can do using this kind of best practices. So let me first show you the basics of using the data analyst in ChatGPT. So here I'm in my ChatGPT environment, and so to use the data analyst, the only thing we need to do is to upload an Excel sheet. And the moment you upload an Excel sheet, ChatGPT actually realizes that it will need to start analyzing data, and then the data analyst will be automatically enabled. So let me show you the Excel sheet that I prepared. So this is simply a hypothetical example. So here I have quarterly sales data for customers of a company. So here are the names of the customers, their location, and here we have the quarterly sales data. So these are the data that I will use as an example. So I will now close the Excel sheet so that we can go to my ChatGPT, and now I will upload these data here. So let me briefly go now to my file. Yes, so now I've uploaded the file, so you can see the file here, and now I need to write a prompt to ask it to analyze. And here as an example, I'm saying, look, you're an expert in analyzing sales data. In attachment, you find an overview of sales data. Can you identify over and underperformance in the data? Please report your analytical approach and explain why companies are labeled as under or overperformers. Please include a visual that clearly highlights the under and overperformance. So now I can execute this prompt, and then you will see it is reading my Excel, and it's now what it's called analyzing. And that means, and now it's not immediately generating text or something like that. Actually, what it's doing now is generating code, Python code, to execute my instructions. So now it's actually trying to code data in order to identify under and over performance. And if you know how to write Python code, and I, for instance, do a lot of Python coding, you can quite easily understand what is happening here. Yeah, so it's using data frames to do the analysis. So we can now go down, and here actually it's further analyzing the data. So you see it's doing quite some steps. And here it now has generated for me a first visual of over and under performance. Yeah, so it says the visual above clearly maps each company based on its average sales and recent growth. The dashed blue lines represent the dataset averages, dividing the chart into quadrants. Yeah, so here at the green ones are overperformers, the red ones are underperformers. So now I can start to find out over and underperformers in this graph. Yeah? So, and you see the top right quadrant represent the overperformers, bottom left underperformance, other quadrants are average performance. So that's now how it has organized the analysis. Of course, we could now ask it to give a different kind of visual or whatever. But here you can see that actually with quite a straightforward prompt, we can already get a nice analysis of under and over performers. There is always a risk of hallucination, yeah? So you will need to double check. You cannot just blindly trust what it produces. So it's always good then to go to your Excel and double check whether the data are accurate. Yeah? But in my experience, often this makes sense. Of course, the best thing to do would to double check the code so that you can really find out, okay, did it do what it wants me to do? But just as a warning, you always need to double check. You cannot blindly trust on it. So this is kind of the basics of using the data analyst. But now let's give me some recommendations on how you can do more complex statistical analysis with this data analyst. And here actually on the slide, I have 4 specific recommendations. So the first one is, if you want to do quite complex analysis, it's, in my experience, quite essential to very clearly describe in the prompt the meaning of every variable in your database. And so that you can avoid that there can be ambiguity about what a variable exactly means. So it actually makes sense to clearly describe this variable is measuring this, so that ChatGPT really understands the meaning of each variable. I also, when I do this kind of analysis, I would typically give it input in which kind of analytical approach it should apply, or you could also ask it to experiment with different analytical approaches explicitly, and that then you ask it to really clearly indicate which analytical approach has been applied. If you want to do quite complex analysis, my experience is that actually it's better to go to a reasoning model. Yeah? So in the first example, I used the traditional ChatGPT 4o. When you want to do more complex analyses, I tend to use the O3 reasoning model, because then it will do some additional, well, it's called thinking, so it will create additional steps. And typically for more complex analyses, my experience is that the quality gets better. And again, finally, I always ask it to create some visuals, because this can allow me to quite easily assess whether hallucination has happened, when a mistake is happening. Again, this can always happen, so it's always good to double check. So these are kind of 4 recommendations that I have to improve your usage of the data analyst. And let me show you now an example of how we can use these recommendations to do a bit more sophisticated analyses. Yes, so now I'm again in ChatGPT. I uploaded again the same database, but now instead of just identifying over and underperformers, I want ChatGPT to use the data analyst to actually predict the sales in the next quarter. And so here is a prompt that I prepared to do that. And this is already a bit more complex in terms of analytical approach. So here I try to formulate a more extensive prompt. Yeah, so I start in the same way, saying you're an experienced data analyst. The database provides data on sales for different quarters. But I'm actually now here giving some additional information on what the meaning is of specific variables. Yeah? So we have the column December 23, and here I explain what this column exactly represents, and the same for the column March 24. So in this way, I want to give it a good understanding about what each variable means. Then, of course, I ask it to predict the customer sales in the 3rd quarter of 2025, based on the time frame that is present in the data. Here I then explicitly ask it to use different statistical approaches to create such a prediction. It needs to carefully compare these approaches and make a selection of what it sees as the best approach. And I ask it to explicitly report the final approach that has been decided upon, and I wanted to create some visuals that illustrate the prediction. Yeah, so here I try to apply all these kind of best practices. And as mentioned, this is already a bit more complex, so here I might actually use the O3 reasoning model. So now let's press enter, and then again it will start analyzing our database, and this will actually now take even a bit longer, because now indeed it will do some thinking, and meaning it will generate different steps to execute the task that I have instructed to the model. So now we will have to wait a bit to see the final result. Yes, so now the results are ready, and this took a bit more time. Yeah, so it has been working for like 1 minute and 12 seconds. And again, of course, it has generated quite some coding to assess kind of different methods to predict sales in the next quarter. And so here it kind of compares these different approaches. So it has kind of tested out 4 different approaches. Here I get a kind of visual comparing the accuracy of the different approaches. And in the end, here it gives me a table with the comparison. So in the end, actually, it concludes that the Holt linear prediction model would be the best prediction model to use. And here it actually gives us an explanation why that's the case. So you see here, it already does quite a lot of more sophisticated statistical analysis. And again, you will have to double check. You cannot blindly rely on it, but at least this can give you a lot of inspiration about what is the best analytical approach to do sales forecasting based on the data that you provided. Yeah, so I hope I have been able to show you that with this data analyst, you can actually engage in quite complex analyses, but you need to kind of tune it in the right way, clearly explain the variables, clearly formulate the analytical approaches, use the O3 model, and then it can actually be a very powerful tool. So I hope this can be helpful for your own data analytical projects. And please don't forget to subscribe if you like this video. Thanks a lot. Bye.